I still remember the sound her heels made on the office floor, slow, steady, like she already knew exactly where she was going. I looked up from my computer and saw a woman standing in front of my desk with a calmness that didn't match the look in her eyes. She said my name. Not excuse me, not hi, not are you the manager. She said my full name, like someone calling roll. For a second, I honestly thought she was a client. Then she held up her phone, and there he was on the lock screen, my guy, smiling in a family photo I had never seen. Her wedding ring caught the overhead light, and my entire body went cold. My hands hovered over my keyboard, pretending I was still working, but I couldn't even remember what I'd been typing. She didn't accuse me. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just said, "I'm tired of cleaning up his double lives. I thought you deserved to know who he really is." My throat closed. I could feel people in the office listening without looking. He wasn't even in the building yet, but I could already imagine the panic on his face when he realised his wife had beat him to the truth. She explained, calm, almost bored, that I wasn't the first, that she recognised the pattern, the late nights, the separation, the emotional confessions, the exact script he'd used on her years ago, and on at least 2 other women in between. I couldn't hear half of what she said after that. Just fragments, never separated. Same lies. You're not the problem. He just likes escaping. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might get sick right there at my desk. Shame hit first, then disbelief, then this weird, hollow numbness that spread through me like anesthesia. All I could think was, I'm 41 years old. How did I let this happen to me again? When she finally walked away, all the noise in the office rushed back in. Printers, typing, someone laughing down the hall, like the world hadn't just collapsed right on top of me. That was the morning I realised I'd been living inside someone else's lie. And the worst part? A quiet part of me had always suspected it. I just didn't want it to be true. So here's the part I never admit out loud. I'm a 41-year-old divorced mum with a teenage daughter, a stable job, and a life that looks responsible from the outside. I wasn't out here chasing drama. I wasn't looking to be anybody's affair. I thought I'd outgrown that kind of stupidity. But then he happened, a co-worker who made me feel seen again, a man who said he was separated, who told me he was basically living alone, who swore he was just trying to protect his kids while he figured out the divorce. He wasn't separated, not even close. But to understand how I let it get this bad, how I let him crawl so deep under my skin, you have to see how it started. To be honest, when I first met him, I wasn't looking for anything. I was in that phase of life where you've made peace with the idea that maybe the big, sweeping love story just isn't coming for you. I had my daughter, my work, my routines. My divorce had been messy enough that I convinced myself I liked the quiet. But he had this way of slipping into my days without me noticing. It started with stupid things, inside jokes during meetings, text messages about work that somehow turned into conversations about music, late night chats that felt more personal than they should have. He wasn't even my type. Not really. But he was warm and funny, and he looked at me like I was someone worth paying attention to. When you're in your 40s and juggling bills, deadlines, and a teenager who barely speaks to you, that kind of attention feels like oxygen. He told me he respected how strong I was, how I carried myself, how I didn't let life crush me, things my ex-husband never said, things I didn't even realise I wanted to hear. From the start, he painted himself as wounded. He told me he was basically separated, staying with his wife only because the kids were struggling and the timing wasn't right. He never bashed her. He framed everything like he was trapped in a situation he didn't know how to leave ethically. And that worked on me, a lot more than I want to admit. When someone tells you they're suffering but trying their best, it hits something deep, especially when you've spent years feeling unseen. I thought he was vulnerable. I thought he was being honest. I thought I was lucky to see the real him. Looking back, I realised he was building a narrative one where he was the hero doing the right thing and I was the one person who truly understood him. I should have questioned more, but I didn't. That was on me. The idealisation phase. There's a particular kind of high that comes from being chosen by someone who seems emotionally complicated. It makes you feel special, like you're the only person who gets them. With him, everything felt intense, even when nothing physical had happened yet. There were moments when we'd talk in the break room and I'd feel this stupid flutter in my chest like I was a teenager again. He remembered small details, what coffee I liked, why winter depressed me, which days my daughter had late classes. That's what hooked me. Not grand gestures, not flattery, just being noticed. I didn't tell anyone about him at first, not because I was hiding it more, because I felt protective of whatever we were. It felt too fragile to expose to other people's opinions. And honestly, I didn't want to hear the obvious questions. Is he really separated? How long? Why is he pursuing someone before he's divorced? I didn't have answers, and I didn't want to admit that. He'd text me at midnight saying he couldn't sleep. He'd vent about feeling lonely, disconnected, misunderstood. I'd stay up talking him through it, even though I had work the next morning. Part of me liked being the person he turned to. Another part was already becoming dependent on the attention. When he finally kissed me leaning in after a long day, whispering that he'd been trying not to fall for me, it felt inevitable, like we'd been building toward it for months. I didn't question it. I didn't slow down. I told myself life was short, that I deserved happiness, that I wasn't doing anything wrong since he said the marriage was already dead. Denial is a skill. I didn't know how good I was at it until then. First cracks. The first real red flag came early, but I brushed it off. It was a Saturday. He had promised we'd spend the day together. He even talked about taking me to this little cafe he loved, but then he texted last minute saying something came up with his kids. No details, just, sorry, I'll make it up to you. Don't be mad. I wasn't mad, not outwardly, but something felt off. The tone, the timing, the way it sounded like a message he'd sent before to someone else. Then there was the night I saw the faint tan line where a wedding ring used to sit. He told me he didn't wear it anymore because it was too painful. I wanted to believe that, so I did. Another night, we were at my place, and his phone buzzed non-stop. When I asked who it was, he laughed it off and said, "Don't worry, if it mattered, I'd tell you." It was a dismissal dressed as reassurance, and I accepted it like an idiot. A week later, he disappeared for 2 full days. No texts, no explanations. When he finally resurfaced, he blamed family drama and made it sound like he was protecting me from stress, and I apologised to him for asking where he'd been, for sounding insecure, for implying he might lie to me. That was the moment something shifted, not in the relationship and me. I started waiting for his messages like they were medicine. I rearranged my schedule for him. I cancelled plans with friends. I made myself available, even when he wasn't. And every time he pulled away, I told myself it meant he was struggling, not that he was hiding. The unease. There was one night, quiet, strange, when he slipped and mentioned something his wife supposedly said, something very normal, very present tense. Not the separated version of her, the real one. He froze. I froze. Then he brushed it off with a joke, and I let it go. But a cold feeling settled in my chest that didn't leave. If I'd listened to that feeling then, I could have saved myself so much damage. But I didn't, because I wanted to believe him more than I wanted the truth. Before everything fell apart, there was a stretch of time where I genuinely believed we were building something real. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, those nights he spent at my place felt like stolen pieces of a future he was too scared to claim. We'd eat takeout on my couch, talk about work, complain about life, and I'd think, this is what a relationship is supposed to feel like. And then he would vanish, not always dramatically. Sometimes it was subtle, delayed replies, vague excuses, late nights at the office. Other times it was a full blackout, entire weekends where I didn't hear from him at all. He always had a reason afterward, a sick kid, a meltdown at home, a crisis he had to handle. He'd apologise in that soft voice he used when he wanted me to forgive him. And every time I did, it became a pattern. He disappeared. He apologised. I forgave him. We pretended everything was fine. If you do that loop enough times, you stop noticing it's toxic. You start thinking this is just how complicated love works. And that's exactly what he wanted. Escalation of toxic patterns. The gaslighting didn't start all at once. It was a slow creep, so quiet I barely heard it. At first, he'd say things like, "You're reading too much into it. You know how anxious you get. Don't let your mind trick you. You're projecting your ex's crap onto me." And I believed him, because it was easier to believe I was overthinking than to accept he was lying. Once, I asked why he always texted me from the car, but never from inside his house. He sighed like I was exhausting him. "Do you want my kids to find out before we even figure out the divorce? You're putting me in a horrible position." Suddenly, I was the selfish one. I backed off immediately. Another time, I mentioned something small he'd told me before a detail that didn't match his new version of events. Instead of explaining, he flipped it. "You're remembering wrong. I'd never say something like that." And he said it so confidently that I genuinely questioned my own memory. He was good, really good. He knew exactly how to twist my insecurities until I doubted reality itself, and the fewer things I trusted, the more I clung to him. My daughter started noticing I was distracted, checking my phone constantly. I'd hide in the bathroom to read his messages, just so she wouldn't see the desperation on my face. That was the part that still embarrasses me, not the affair, not the lies, the way I shrank myself to fit whatever version of the story he needed that day. Signs of something deeper. Things escalated when I started noticing real inconsistencies, not just vibes. He told me he was staying in a rented apartment during the separation, but he never let me visit. Bad neighbourhood, he said. Kids' stuff everywhere, he said. Not a place I want you to see me living, he said. His phone was always face down, always on silent. If a call came through, he'd step outside or into another room. He never posted anything online, and he never wanted to take pictures together. He claimed it was to protect me from drama, but the truth felt uglier. He slipped up twice. Once he mentioned a school event for his kids, one that supposedly wouldn't exist if he was barely living with them. Another time he reacted to a text with this flinch he couldn't hide, the kind people make when they're afraid they've been caught. I started doing the thing I swore I'd never do again. Investigating. Nothing dramatic, no stalking. No hacking, just small things. Checking his stories, the few he posted, noticing when he went offline, matching timelines, tiny pieces that didn't fit, piling up until I couldn't ignore them anymore. The part I hate admitting is that I didn't want proof he was lying. I wanted proof he wasn't. Because if he wasn't lying, then I hadn't made a fool of myself again. Then I wasn't just some placeholder woman he used for emotional escape. I was so desperate to be the exception that I ignored the rule he'd been showing me from day one. Internal war. Around this time, I barely slept. I woke up with anxiety sitting on my chest, checking my phone like my life depended on it. I stopped hanging out with friends. I lied to my sister about how good things were. I doubled down at work to distract myself, but even then, he was in the back of my mind, filling up every quiet space. Part of me felt like the adult part knew this was wrong, knew he wasn't leaving, knew he wasn't separated, but another part, the part that only wanted to be wanted, clung to anything that offered hope. He'd show up at my door after a 3-day silence and hold me like he'd just survived a war. "I needed you," he'd whisper. "You're the only place I can breathe." And I let that be enough. I let that be everything. That's how these relationships work, not all at once, but piece by piece, until you're so entangled that leaving feels like cutting off your own arm. The main reveal. The day everything shattered wasn't messy. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet-tearily quiet. His wife walked into my office with the calmness of someone who has done this before. She didn't look angry. She looked tired in a way I recognised in my own reflection. She told me she knew about me for a while, that she recognised the pattern years ago, that he always found a woman at work, a woman who was kind, empathetic, a good listener, someone going through her own life transition, someone easy to isolate with emotional intimacy. She told me he'd never been separated, never lived alone, never even slept on the couch, that the divorce I was waiting for never existed in any universe except the one he built for his affairs. Then she said something that stayed with me. He doesn't fall in love with women. He falls in love with escape routes, and I was one of them. Just another exit door he could slip through whenever real life felt too heavy. The confrontation. When I confronted him later, he didn't even look shocked, just annoyed like I'd ruined the ending of a movie he'd already seen. He said things like, "She twists everything. You shouldn't have talked to her. If you trusted me, we wouldn't be here. You knew I was married. Don't make this dramatic." Not once did he apologise. Not once did he admit anything. He acted like it was all an inconvenience, a misunderstanding, a moment we could move past if we really cared about each other. That was the moment something in me finally broke. Not my heart, my illusion. The illusion that I mattered more than the fantasy he built out of me. I walked away from him, but the damage stayed. I didn't recognise myself anymore. And honestly, at that point, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The days after everything collapsed felt unreal, like I was moving underwater while everyone else walked on solid ground. I blocked his number the minute I left his place, but that didn't stop me from checking my phone every 10 minutes. expecting some grand confession or apology he was never going to send. Blocking him wasn't closure. It was just a bandage over a wound I wasn't ready to look at yet. I told my daughter I was just tired when she asked why I'd been quiet for days. I didn't have the heart to admit I'd let a man dismantle me piece by piece and call it love. She already carried the weight of watching her parents fail at marriage. I didn't want to hand her proof that adults keep making the same mistakes at 41. Sleep was useless. I'd fall asleep exhausted, only to jerk awake thinking about every red flag I ignored, every lie he told, every night he'd kissed me, knowing he'd drive back home to a wife who'd already rehearsed this heartbreak with other women before me. For the first week, I couldn't throw out anything he'd touched, his empty water bottle on my nightstand, the sweater he forgot on my couch, the receipt from the takeout place we ordered from too often. It wasn't sentiment, it was disbelief, evidence that he'd been in my life in a way that suddenly felt unreal. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the version of myself who believed I deserved what he was offering. Consequences for him, he didn't get off as clean as he expected. Word spread around the office, not because I told anyone, but because people like him always leave messes behind that reveal themselves eventually. A few co-workers who used to admire him now avoided him. Others just gave him that look, the one people give when they're watching a person crumble behind a professional mask. His wife stopped doing damage control. That part was almost satisfying in a dark way. She stopped covering for him, stopped showing up at company events pretending everything was fine, stopped giving excuses for his erratic behaviour. Without her smoothing the edges, the cracks showed. He started coming into work looking drained, irritated, almost panicked some days. He lost access to his escape route that was his justice. Not exposure, not humiliation, not revenge. Losing the place he ran to when the truth got too heavy. He used me to breathe, and when I cut that off, he suffocated in his own lies. I don't know if he's still with his wife. Part of me doesn't care. Part of me thinks she deserves better. But I also understand why she stayed. Emotional manipulation makes you believe you're the one responsible for someone else's survival. I can't judge her for drowning where I almost did. Slow rebuilding. Healing didn't come in a clean arc. It came in fragments. One day I woke up and realised I hadn't thought about him until mid-afternoon. Another day, I finally told my sister the truth, not the PG version, but the real timeline, the real emotional mess. She didn't judge, she just said, "I'm glad you're out," and I broke down more than I had in weeks. I started therapy again. Not to talk about him, but to talk about why I ignored myself for so long, why someone else's affection felt more validating than my own self-worth, why I kept choosing men who were emotionally unavailable and calling the chaos chemistry. I went back to small things, late-night movies with my daughter, long walks after work, rediscovering hobbies I'd let die. I cleaned my apartment slowly, not in some dramatic purge, but in quiet steps. The sweater went in a donation bag, the water bottle in the trash, the takeout receipt ripped in half. There was no big "I'm healed now" moment, just a gradual return to myself. Cold clarity and message to the viewer. Looking back, here's what scares me most. I didn't end up in a toxic affair because I was stupid. I ended up in one because I was lonely and hopeful at the same time. That combination will put you on your knees if you're not careful. If you're watching this and you're talking to someone who's separated or almost divorced, or just needs time, listen to me carefully. When someone is truly leaving, you don't have to decode it. You don't have to wait through silent weekends. You don't have to accept crumbs and call them a meal. If you're constantly defending them, hiding the relationship, or making excuses for things your gut is screaming about, that's not love. That's emotional addiction. It feels like passion, but it's just pain on a loop. Don't convince yourself you're the exception. People like him don't have exceptions, only patterns. Closing line. I spent months believing I was the woman he'd risk everything for. But in the end, I was exactly what his wife said, just another exit he used to escape his real life, until both of them showed up in mine.